Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the X570M Pro4 from Asrock. And also this motherboard uses the same V-Core VRM, actually, and SoC VRM as the Pro4 ATX, the Phantom Gaming 4 ATX, and the Phantom Gaming 4 Wi-Fi from Asrock as well. So, yeah, just wanted to point that out is... you know, the like basically a lot of what I say, like everything I say about the VRM for this board is true for also the other boards I just listed off. So, yeah, let's get into it. This is the board. That's the heatsink. It's a great big metal slab. And this heatsink actually should be more like this is more of a thermal braking device. Right? Well, actually, no, not even that, because it doesn't bring the temperatures to a stop. This is more like a thermal delay the inevitable, because it has no surface area. Like, yeah, I mean, okay, like it's not as bad as some of the blocks that were like that tall, you know, and just sort of sit on top of the VRM, but like this, well, this is pretty open, but I'd assume that probably that'll just end up being like all this empty space down here is probably going to become an airflow dead zone, so you can basically ignore all of the surface area down there. And, well, the rest of the heatsink really isn't that great. To make things worse, what's actually hiding under this lovely heatsink is well, it's kind of funny. So, well, what's hiding under that heatsink is the, nope, wrong photo. There, let's do that. Is this. This is what's hiding under the heatsink. This is very, very similar to the VRM you would have on a... I just realized we can't see the controller because that's the wrong tool. What the hell? I want the move tool. Is that not the move tool? It's not the move tool. There, no, move the active layer. Nope, can't see the controller in this photo. Great, this is what I get for... I should have asked for more pictures. Anyway, who cares? I don't. So, yeah, this VRM right here is, unfortunately, basically the same VRM you would get on a X470 Master SLI. Now, they did do a few slight tweaks to it. So, when I basically threw a fit over the Master SLI being a 4-phase instead of an 8-phase, because Asrock advertised it as an 8-phase, and it wasn't an 8-phase. So... they fixed that. It's now an 8-phase. It's still incredibly crap. It's just got more phases. So that's great. Progress has been made. So how did Asrock fix that? So we have these chips right here. And then, of course, we have the control... Actually, do I have a photo where we can see everything? Oh, we can't... No. Wait. Oops. Wrong layer. Yeah, no. We don't have a photo that you can see everything. So this is going to be fun. But... anyway, we have these lovely chips right here, which these are UP1961s. These are doubled drivers. So basically, one PWM signal goes in, two phase drive signals actually come out. So, yeah. These do take your... because basically, Asrock is using this chip right over here for the controller, which that is a UP9505. You know, I've decided, it seems like when I structure these videos even less than usual, I'm going to make them harder to follow. They're shorter. Anyway, yeah, that's a UP9505. That's configured in a 4+2 phase configuration, which is a... like, the thing about this chip is I think MSI uses it on some low-end boards, and there's like a lot of different variants of it. Because the only, like, the public one I've found is like 4+3 only, but I've seen it used in like 6-phase configurations as well. So I'm just like, okay, this chip seems to be, like, I can't get enough information about it. But anyway, so the 9505, you know, it's running 4+2, and then they're doing ×2 on the 4 through the UP1961s. So yeah, that's how Asrock is actually getting, you know, 8 phases here. Because initially, like on the previous board, you actually had exactly this same set of components. You just had drivers that weren't, like, you had drivers that couldn't double. And you also had a much worse voltage controller. You had the ISL something that I can't remember the name of, but that controller is crap. Okay, like that controller is god-awful, whereas the UP9505 is actually pretty decent. So, Yeah, unfortunately, that's about like, so, you know, the control scheme here, I'm actually like, it's okay. The MOSFETs are very not okay. These are still the very, very worst MOSFETs you can, like, the funny thing is, these were the worst MOSFETs you could get on X470. Well, with X570, that hasn't changed. In fact, everybody else has just gotten better, and Asrock has stayed the same. So the high side MOSFET, you know, so actually I should put an H on that. So that's our high side MOSFET, you know, for like this phase right here. That's our high side. Our high side MOSFET is a Sinopower SM 4337. And this MOSFET's actually fine. What isn't fine is the low side. The low side here is an SM 4336. This thing's 5.3 milliohms RDS on at 10 volts. It's trash. Like, this is garbage. The next worst MOSFET is the 4C06N that Gigabyte uses. That's 4 milliohms. Then MSI has a 2.8 milliohm RDS on 4C024N, if I remember. Actually, it might be the 28. Can't remember the name right now, but MSI has a 2.8 milliohm RDS on MOSFET. Gigabyte's 4C06N is so weak that Gigabyte puts two of them in parallel in each phase in order to get more current throughput. This right here is god-awful. And, like, the end result is that, so we now have an 8-phase, but per phase it is incredibly weak. Because, yeah. And the funny thing is, Asrock could have very, very easily fixed this by just putting a second one. If they literally just put two of these in parallel, which is, like, that's a really common trick you see on sort of cost-effective voltage regulators out there, especially on, like, GPUs. It's really, really popular. Like, low-end GPUs is just like, well, how do we get more current handling capability? Just smash more low-side MOSFETs in parallel. As long as you're not going to some ridiculous number of them, it's actually a really good way of getting more current handling capability, especially if your drivers are capable of driving the extra load. So the thing is, yeah, this VRM, because of this really awful low side MOSFET, is just like, because the SM4337, like, this is reasonably fast. It's not very low RDS on. You can get equally fast lower RDS on high side MOSFETs, but high side MOSFETs handle roughly like 10% or, you know, 10 to 20% of the current going through your voltage regulator, depending on the output voltage. That 20% is if you're pushing like 2.4 volts. So realistically, it's more like 10 to 15. These handle like 90 to 85% of the current going through the voltage regulator. And the funny thing is that so the main loss in a in your low side MOSFET is due to P equals I squared R. Okay, so Gigabyte has an R value. So this is like our RDS on, basically, right? Gigabyte has an RDS on of like 2. Because they have 4 milliohm RDS on MOSFETs in parallel. They also have more phases, which effectively, because the thing is, your current is going through each phase, you know, you split the current across more phases, that actually reduces your I component there, right? So yeah, Gigabyte's VRM, obviously far more efficient. MSI's VRM is actually also an 8-phase, but MSI's running 2.8 milliohms of RDS on. So again, like, linearly less heat, like, conduction power losses. So this VRM is just bloody awful. Now, when does, like, so for X570 motherboard standards, this VRM is just bloody awful. Now, how much does this actually matter? Well, not that much. So, because let's get into the efficiency figures. So 1.2 volts output, 300 kilohertz, well, no, it's not that it doesn't matter that much. It's just that, like, depending on what CPU you have, you don't need that much current in the first place, so it doesn't matter. That's what I was getting at. Anyway, 1.2 volts output, 300 kilohertz switching frequency, 10 volts drive. They're probably driving it with straight 12 volts because 12 volts is more convenient to grab on a motherboard than 10 volts. Like, you'd need an actual regulator for that, so they're probably running it off a straight 12. But anyway, 1.2 volts, 300 kilohertz, 10 volts drive. This VRM will push 100 amps while producing 16 watts of heat. Now, I actually believe that the heatsink that Asrock has on this can deal with 16 watts of heat. That should be no problem. What I really doubt it can deal with is 125 amps. This is like an overclock, like a maxed out overclock on a 2700X. At that point, this VRM will produce about 24 watts of heat. And it will probably overheat if you give it enough time. At 150 amps output, it'll produce about 33 watts of heat. There's no way that heatsink is ever dealing with that amount of heat output. And then at 175 amps, you're going to be looking at about 44 watts of heat output. And then 200 amps, you're going to be looking at about 56 watts of heat output. So, what does that mean for this motherboard? Like, how much do you need to worry about this? Well, if you have a 6-core Ryzen 3rd Gen CPU, you actually don't have to worry about this at all, because good luck getting one of those to hit 100 amps. Like, seriously, good luck with that. When I was, I had a chance to mess around with one of the engineering sample 16-core CPUs. Those tend to stop in between that 175 amp and 200 amp current draw level. Like, you're not getting them past this range. So something with less than half the cores has no chance of hitting 100 amps. Just not happening. So yeah, for a 6-core, this is a great VRM. The thing is, this is an X570 motherboard. Therefore, it costs as much money as an X570 motherboard. Therefore, it's like, why don't you just buy a B450? Right? Like, that's kind of my view on that. Is just like, why would you buy an X570 motherboard for a 3600 for like a 3600 or a 3600X? Now, if you're running a 3700X, you can get just up about, like, you can start approaching that 100 amps current draw figure, and there the VRM should still be relatively okay depending on like airflow conditions inside your case. I would not run a 12 core on this, because the 12 core is going to land in between the sort of 125 amps to 150 amps current draw figure. And at that point, you're looking at very hot. If you're overclocking, obviously. If you're running stock, everything should stay below the 100 amp mark. So yeah, stock, this VRM is fine. If you're overclocking, it's very not fine. As soon as you go past the 8-core CPU, because you need to keep in mind, like, 6-core and 8-core, that's only a 33% difference in core count, so basically a 33% difference in power, in current draw, basically power consumption. But if you go from the 8-core to the 12-core, that's a 50% increase in core count. That's actually a roughly 50% increase in current draw. This VRM is just not going to deal with that very well. So, yeah, like, good job, Asrock. Now you have a 10-phase. It's just really unfortunate that all of the phases suck. And what really, really disappoints me is that Asrock really could have just put, twice as many 4336s in here, and it would have made such an improvement. Like, here's the thing. So I went ahead and just did the calculation. So what if they had 2 low-side Mosfets, right? What if they just ran 2 low-side Mosfets? Well, instead of producing 33 watts of heat at 150 amps, this VRM would produce 22. I refuse to believe that Asrock is paying more than like a couple cents per MOSFET here. And there's plenty of space. Like, if they got creative with the VRM layout here, they could totally fit an extra low side MOSFET into every single one of these phases. It would have made such an improvement on this VRM. But no. Like, here's one 4336 with all 5.3 milliohms of RDS on. Have fun with the heat if you're running with anything, if you're trying to overclock anything with more than 8 cores. Which, it's like, it's an X570 board. I really don't know why they could, like, just one more MOSFET in each phase. Like, it would have made such an improvement. But yeah. And actually, even then, that 22 watts of heat combined with this heatsink is, this heatsink, I still like 22 watts? Really? Right? Like, on this? This looks very similar to the heatsink that, like, Asus had on the... Well, it looks a lot heavier than what Asus had, so I don't know. Like, the thing is, depending on how much of a cross-section you have, heat spreads faster through larger cross-sections. But this surface area-wise looks very similar to what Asus had on the X470, like, Pro motherboard. And that heatsink sucked, like, really badly. Like, that heatsink is so bad. Like, that heatsink can barely do... I want to say around 15 watts, something like that. Can barely deal with, like, yeah. So This right here is not a confidence-inspiring heatsink. This right here is not a, like, this is just a straight-up bad voltage regulator. At least, like, it has 8 phases, sure, but each phase individually sucks. So, you know, it's like you'd need twice as many phases before this would be acceptable as far as I'm concerned, which most of the benefit would be just like having more low-side Mosfets, right? Like that's where that would come from. So, yeah, it's just like, like if you want to run a 6-core or an 8-core on this motherboard, knock yourself out, you'll be fine. But if you want to run a 12-core and like do like at stock, you'll still be fine. It's just like if you're going to be overclocking, this VRM is not adequate for more than, you know, 8 cores at all. Not even remotely adequate. In fact, if you put a 2700X in this, it'll probably be able to overheat it when you start overclocking, because, yeah, a 2700X can pull a pretty serious amount of current, and this VRM can't deal with serious amounts of current whatsoever. So, yeah, you know, but hey, like, you know, props to Asrock for, I guess, I'm not sure that my rant caused it, but I don't know, maybe, like, I guess recently we've seen more people pay attention to voltage regulators just in general. So I guess, you know, at this point, Asrock's been like, okay, well, we got to make the phases real this time, because otherwise somebody's going to complain again. So yeah, it does have 8, but they're just not very good. So one more MOSFET. It's an X570 board. I'm sure they could have squeezed in, like, they could have added one more MOSFET into each phase, raised the price of this board by like $5, and, like, you know, I'd be so much happier with it. It still wouldn't be incredible, but I'd be so much happier with it. I'd have far less to complain about at that point. But no, that's not what we get. We get one very crap low side MOSFET in each phase, which ultimately makes the whole VRM kind of crap. So that's what's going on with that. Anyway, for the SoC VRM, hey, look at that. That's I wonder. Oh no, why? Actually, no, I do know why. Like, this is not a problem, but yeah, see here we have the 2 high sides, 2 low sides. The extra high side actually is probably not that helpful, since, well, yeah, shouldn't be that helpful. Or actually, did I check that? I don't think I checked that, but the extra low side, like, like, you know, SoC VRM is this. It's 2 phases, 1 and 2. There's your 2 separate drivers. Those actually look like they might. Yeah, it looks like they're still 1961. Wait. It might be 1961s. But, yeah, like, these are separate phases because there's a driver for each. Anyway, yeah, so that's our SoC VRM. I don't normally go into detail about it because it's not worth going into detail about. It doesn't push that much current. It doesn't really get that hot unless you're running an APU. And if you're running an APU, I'd say an X570 motherboard like this is just a bad fit for that kind of build anyway. You have, in my opinion, much better MATX options on like B450 or well, not really with X470. Well, no, X470 doesn't really have very good MATX options. The thing about MATX as a whole is that it's kind of a neglected form factor at this point, because basically what I've heard from multiple board vendors is MATX doesn't sell. So we don't make good MATX boards. Now, I think there's a bit of a negative feedback loop going on with that, because it's like people don't buy MATX boards. So board vendors don't make good MATX boards. People don't want to buy bad MATX boards, so they sell even less MATX boards than they used to, right? Like, basically they're pushing people who want the smaller form factor into either like really nice ITX boards, because for some reason ITX boards end up being actually like, they seem to get a lot of attention in terms of like actual like design effort. And then ATX board, you know, they've basically pushed all of the people interested in MATX to either buy a better ATX board or a better ITX board. Like, it's just like MATX is just completely neglected. So, yeah, and Asrock are the only ones with an X570M ATX board, and it's just like, well, and it's not impressive. Like, like it's neglected, right? Like, they literally well, to be fair, even their ATX offerings are basically like slightly tweaked X470 boards. So, and those aren't much better either, but like this is the only MATX X570 board, and, well, I feel sorry for anybody who you know is a MATX form factor enthusiast, because like, you don't have much of a choice, and the only choice you have sucks. So that's kind of that. Anything else worth mentioning? Oh yeah, it does have troubleshooting LEDs. There. I forgot I normally do overclocking features at some point in my video, and I was like checking my notes right now, and I'm like, there's LEDs on this? Where are they? I forgot. Anyway, but we have LEDs here, so indicates CPU boot up errors, memory boot up errors, GPU boot up errors, and boot media errors. Unfortunately, see, in some videos I complain about how there's some board vendors who put 4 LEDs right next to each other and they're all the same color, so when one of the LEDs lights up, you don't know which one's actually lit up, and you can't look at it because the LED is shining, so when you try to look at that, you get blinded by the LED, and the text right next to it is illegible. Like, you're never going to be able to read it. So, yeah. I hope I'm not sure that these are color coded, but if these aren't color coded, then that is exactly what I was talking about. It's just like, yeah, 4 LEDs of the same color next to each other, just squeezed into some random corner of the motherboard. So it's like, yeah, I can see that there's a problem because the motherboard's glowing red. I don't know what the problem is because I can't freaking read it because I don't know which LED lit up. So this is exactly that. Which reminds me, actually, that's my complaint for the X299 OCF's LEDs, because that board has this too. There's like 4 error indication LEDs on the top edge of the board. They're right next to each other, so they light up, and it's just like, well, something's wrong, but I wish I knew what, because the LEDs don't help you. They could literally replace it with 1 LED. It would be roughly equally helpful. Anyway, let's move on to the memory VRM, which do I have a photo that's like specifically the memory VRM? Oh, I guess I didn't bother to grab one. Anyway, for the memory VRM, we're looking at a single phase, trying its very best to look like 2 phases. That's this mess right here. It's controlled by this chip over there. That's an APW controller, which is kind of interesting. You don't normally, these are really popular on GPUs, ANPEC controllers are, but for whatever reason, you don't normally see them that much on motherboards. But anyway, it's an APW 8720B. It's 1 phase, and Asrock decided, instead of making the vCore VRM better, let's put a useless extra inductor into the memory VRM. And the thing is, I've complained about this before. Like, why? Why does this inductor exist? I have no idea why that inductor exists. It shouldn't exist. Literally, it just shouldn't exist. Anyway, we also have 2 high-side Mosfets and 2 low-side Mosfets, which I'd say you could kind of, not bother with that one either. You don't need the second high-side in this. And this VRM would still be fine. So yeah, for whatever reason, Asrock just does they splurge on their memory VRM, which doesn't really achieve anything, because the thing is the memory VR the memory voltage regulator doesn't matter that much. It doesn't need to handle that much power, and ultimately, I don't think anybody buying this motherboard cares about doing frequencies higher than 36 megahertz, even if that, right? So it's just why they put this much effort into the memory VRM, well, it's not even effort. It's just why do they put these extra components into the memory VRM? They don't achieve anything. It's it would have been fine with, half of that would probably still be fine, right? And I almost cut it down to half. That would be half, but yeah, so Asrock memory power is, as usual, ridiculous. Well, not ridiculous. Yeah, it's kind of overbuilt and pointless. So that's the VDDR. Board is single BIOS. Your BIOS chip is right there. I couldn't find anything indicating that this has some kind of BIOS flashback functionality, so I assume if you break the BIOS on this board, you're screwed. So that's always fun. Then again, breaking the BIOS, the number one way that happens is if you have a power outage while flashing the BIOS. So basically, well, it's pretty unlikely that don't flash your BIOS in the middle of a thunderstorm, I guess. At least that's my personal experience with power outages is they happen during thunderstorms. I've not really had any other ones. So, yeah. Anyway, one noteworthy feature about this board that's a good thing is this actually comes with Intel LAN. So, and we all know I'm a sucker for Intel LAN. So, yeah, good job, Asrock. That's Intel LAN instead of Realtek. So that's nice. But I guess Like, the thing is, I guess if you're running like a 6-core or an 8-core CPU, this board's actually perfectly fine. Even if you're overclocking, it's going to be perfectly fine. But it's an X570 motherboard, and I kind of feel like a 6-core on this, like, this isn't cheap, right? Like, it's still an X570 motherboard. These motherboards, like, the cheapest X570 board out there, I didn't check the actual price point for this one. I'm sorry. I'm too lazy to bother putting that in my notes. But, like, the cheapest X570 board you can get is $160 or $150. So this is, like, not the cheapest, like, this is not that cheap, and it's just like a 3600 is $200, and it's just like, so you're gonna use a $150 motherboard for a $200 CPU, or I guess a 3700X wouldn't be a bad fit for this as well, but the 3900X just like, well, with the 3700X it makes sense, I guess. Like, this heatsink, because the 3600, 3700X, you should be only hitting, you should actually not hitting, you should be approaching that 100 amp mark. And this heatsink can probably do 16 watts. I'd expect it to be able to deal with it. So, yeah, this is okay for like an 8-core. It is not okay for a 12-core, though. So, yeah, if you wanted like a ultra powerful MATX workstation, this is... Well, I guess if you're running at stock, but then I wouldn't say you have like an ultra powerful MATX workstation because you're running at stock, right? Like you could have more multi-threaded performance if you manually overclock the CPU. So yeah, as long as you stay at stock, this VRM is fine. And if you're on an 8-core, you can overclock that, or 8-core or lower, you can overclock. So that's kind of that. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to take a look at is the memory on the back of the board, and this is T topology. As you can clearly see, this trace comes in all snake-like, and then it splits, and it goes back to this pin, and goes forward to that pin as well. So that's our T right there. We also, like, oh, there's another one, right? Comes in, splits, goes one back, goes one forward. This is a funky one. Right there, that's another T, right? Because it comes in like that. I think it comes in like that. It's actually really hard to keep track of. And then I think this one's another T right there. Anyway, so this is a T topology board. So yeah, you can actually eyeball the topology on some motherboards where you don't like, because some motherboards, they'll just have a ground fill over the traces on the back and the front. Well, on the front you can't see the traces because there's memory slot, like the DIMM slots are over them. But on the back of the board, some boards will have a ground fill and then you can't see anything. So, but here we can see it. This is a T topology. So yeah, it should perform optimally with all four all four DIMM slots populated, but it also depends heavily on the BIOS implementation. So yeah, and also it may not actually, like, a bad T topology will often lose under all operating conditions to a well set up daisy chain. I'm not saying this is bad, I'm just saying like I'm interested in knowing if the board's T topology or not, but ultimately it doesn't actually say that much about how good it's going to be at memory overclocking. It's just like, oh, it's T topology, it should probably do well with 4 DIMMs. Doesn't necessarily mean it will, just that it should. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, what else is there? Oh yeah, like, board has a single 8-pin, but we all know what I think about having more than a single 8-pin on X570 boards, so we don't need to get into that. And oh yeah, last thing I forgot to mention is the capacitors. These are, actually, do we have? Yeah, you can see it right there. We have that little weird, like, logo that looks kind of like this, and that's APAC. And that's a Taiwanese capacitor brand. These, as you can clearly see, they have 5K written on them. So these are 5,000 hours rated, 105 degrees Celsius aluminum polymers. This is the sort of default capacitor, default capacitor for mid-range. Like, you can sometimes find them on mid-range boards, but generally, like, lower-end boards will go with these. And Asus likes them, Gigabyte likes them, Asrock is using them. So, yeah. Really, no surprises there. No surprises in that department. Nothing to really complain about. Yeah. Is there anything else worth mentioning on this board? Nah, not really. So, Oh, this video still ended up being 30 minutes. I have a talent. I thought this one was going to be shorter than that, but anyway, I guess I got distracted by something somewhere. But yeah, that's the X570M Pro 4. Good up to an 8-core. So up to that 100 amp mark. I'm kind of realizing that I should have maybe calculated for 75 amps and 50 amps as well, but yeah. That's it for the video. So thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon, also Teespring. You can find links to both down in the description below. Patreon is if you want to support me directly, and Teespring is if you want to buy actually hardcore overclocking themed merch. So shirts, posters, stickers, that kind of thing. And yeah, both of those help out with running the channel immensely. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.